The federal government is moving ahead on a foreign agent registry following rising concerns about election interference. That news was first reported by Presse and confirmed by our colleagues at Radio-Canada. The Liberals hope to table legislation before Parliament breaks for this summer. Here to discuss this are Dennis Molinaro and Jessica Davis. Dennis is a professor of legal studies at Ontario Tech University and a former national security analyst for the federal government. Jessica is the president of Insight Threat Analysis and a former CSIS senior strategic analyst. Thank you both for joining us. Dennis, I'd like to start with you. You've been calling for a foreign registry, for a while. What do you make of today's announcement?
I think it's a positive development, and I'm glad to hear it. I mean, the devil, of course, is going to be in the details in terms of how this is all going to be set up, and how an individual would get on a registry, and what happens if they don't declare their activities. But so far, I mean, this is very positive news.
Okay, so Jessica, what devil needs to be in those details? What does this need to look like for it to be effective?
There needs to be a number of different things included in the foreign agent registry in terms of the activities that are captured. The one that always catches my eye is, the technical term is disbursement. Basically, it's paying people to do things on behalf of a foreign state. So if a foreign state comes to me and says, Jessica, we want you to write an op-ed in the Globe and Mail, we're going to pay you money to do it, that needs to be captured in the foreign agent registry because I'm exerting my influence on behalf of the foreign state. So these are the kinds of details that need to be captured. The next piece of the puzzle, though, is really about enforcing the foreign agent registry. And enforcement in this country is a huge problem in terms of national security. The questions are really about whether or not the RCMP has enough resources, the mandate, the technical skills to really be investigating foreign interference.
Right. So Dennis, with all of that in mind, I mean, what are the lessons that Canada can learn on how to do this based on what we've seen with similar mechanisms in the United States and in Australia, for example?
Well, I think one is being really clear what activities would actually warrant getting you put on a registry, or that you would have to self-declare. So we would want to tailor those activities. We have to strike a right balance between not having them be too broad, and at the same time not be too limited. So, you know, we might want to consider limiting this to things like if you are lobbying democratic, lobbying in some capacity, politicians, or, trying to influence democratic institutions, and you're working on behalf of foreign government, that would be a type of activity you would want someone to have to declare if they're actually working on behalf of a foreign state to do those activities. At the same time, I think you need a really effective way of dealing with appeals. If a person does not self-declare and is put on a registry and they feel that they've been wrongly put on that registry, then you have to have an effective mechanism to actually deal with an appeal for that.
Right. So Jessica, let's assume Canada does it right and they give you the kind of registry you're looking for. It has the teeth. It's backed up by enforcement. Will a country like China care? Will it actually stop them from getting up to the things they've been getting up to, allegedly, over the past several years?
I think it will curtail some of their activities, but that doesn't mean that they're going to stop interfering in Canadian politics. What it will probably mean is that they'll adapt to that legislation and change their tactics. And this applies not just to China, of course, it applies to other countries, some of whom are more allies to Canada than others. But it's going to capture a wide range of activity, but it's not going to necessarily curtail that foreign interference. So our adversaries particularly will adapt.
Dennis, do you share that view that any new law, I guess, you bring in, they'll find a way to work around it?
Yeah, but that's still a win, right? I mean, if a foreign adversary has to all of a sudden abandon plans and do a whole rethink of their activities and how they go about doing them, then you're still forcing them to do that, and that's a positive thing in a way, right? It's not going to capture everything, and I think people kind of really have to temper their expectations and what they think a foreign agent registry is going to accomplish. Nonetheless, it's something that can be there, that would at least serve as a type of deterrent effect. And it's not going to capture all kinds of activities. And certainly, like Jessica mentioned, people are going to find ways around it. But it still is an important basic element to have in terms of countering this type of foreign interference activity.
Right. That's why everybody, Jessica, uses the term. It's about resilience. It's not going to make you bulletproof, but it is going to be another layer of protection. So walk me through, Jessica, who is captured by something like this? Like who would be covered by a foreign agent registry? Who would be compelled to sign up? And who would maybe voluntarily do it to protect themselves?
Well, that's some of the details that Dennis is talking about,
right.
What exactly that's going to look like. There's a whole scope of what that can look like, and the government did release a consultation paper a little while ago outlining some potential activities. So as I I mentioned earlier, that disbursement activity, but really anyone who's operating on behalf of or directed by a foreign state should be on that registry. So that should exclude, though, things like diplomats, because obviously they're already declared as operating on behalf of a foreign state. We also need to be careful not to duplicate some of the existing laws that we already have on the books that are part of our foreign interference toolkit. So we already have a Lobbying Act, we already have a Security of Information Act, we already have an Elections Act. So I'm really looking at the Foreign Agent Registry to fill a gap in that toolkit. And I think another way to think about it is this is just one small piece of a 300-piece puzzle.
Right.
This fills one corner, perhaps, of what we're missing in terms of effectively addressing foreign interference, but it's certainly not the centerpiece that brings the whole picture into focus.
Right. So Dennis, just on that point, the foreign agent registries in other countries, if you don't comply with the rules and the regulations, you can face criminal penalties because you're breaking the law by conducting activity covered by these things. In some of the stories we've seen here in Canada, it's been diplomats accused of meddling in this. They're not covered by this, so it's still just persona non grata Vienna Convention, right? Like, will this in any way stop interference or impact interference on that level?
No, not really. I mean, because that's not the intended target, right? I mean, it's, Jessica, I think, covered it quite well. I mean, diplomats are free to engage in that type of activity. That's part of diplomacy. They're going to lobby for their interests, but as long as they're doing it openly, that's fine. If they're doing it covertly, then, well, you end up with something like a PNG, right? And a person is persona non grata and sent away. But what we're looking at here is people that are working perhaps on behalf of those diplomats. So working on behalf of a foreign state and not declaring those activities, and they're doing that covertly. So we're really talking more about proxies, per se, people who are engaging in this activity and trying to keep it a secret.
Right, like these Chinese police stations we keep hearing about, which aren't really police stations. They're just non-diplomatic ways of pressuring diaspora members. And on that point, Jessica, just as a final point, the Prime Minister previously said that any registry can't be too broad because you risk targeting certain diaspora groups like Chinese Canadians. So how do they calibrate it to strike that balance?
I'm actually less concerned about this targeting diaspora communities. Because I think the reality is that our foreign adversaries and the states that are engaging in this kind of activity are not solely employing members of their diaspora community to affect this interference activity. They're targeting any kind of Canadian who can be useful to them. So it's not really targeting the diaspora community. It's not saying, all of the people of, for example, Chinese heritage are going to be captured by this. It's far from that. It's the people who are working at the behest of the Chinese government, which could be anyone.
That's right. Okay. All right. Always appreciate the insight. Jessica Davis and Dennis Molinaro. Thanks, gang.
Thank you.